first of all, thank you so much for taking the time to do this. Well, I'd just like to start by asking for your name and your date of birth with your region of birth.
Mohsen Elshimy. This is my full name. I was born in Cairo in 1944.
Where did you migrate to and when did you migrate?
I migrated to Kuwait in 1966. Actually, I had no idea whatsoever that I was going to migrate. A relative of mine used to work there. He was an inspector at the Ministry of Education, and on one occasion we met, or a couple of occasions, and he was the one who convinced me to try to go to Kuwait. At that time, I was working in Cairo with British Airways. At that time, I had a BA in English, and that's why I got this job with British Airways. I think at that time it was BA, called BA. And I stayed with them for 2 years, from 1964, when I graduated, until 1966, when I got the job in Kuwait.
And what was the job in Kuwait? What was the initial
I started as a teacher of English with the Ministry of Education, and I wasn't actually very happy with the job, so that's why I took sort of a leave from the ministry, and I went to the UK. I did my MA there, and I returned back to Kuwait. I got a job with a higher institute, the College of Basic Education. They call it كلية التربية الأساسية. It was a 4-year college that graduates students in order to be teachers, prepares students to be teachers. Afterwards, I decided to do my PhD, so back to England again, and this time, the first time I was in Colchester, Essex, and the second time I was in Wales, University College Cardiff. I got my PhD in 1982. And then I went back to Kuwait. I stayed for a number of years until I decided to immigrate to the United States of America, which I did. I stayed there for 5 years or 5 years and a half, and I got the nationality there. Then I again went back to Kuwait. During my time in Kuwait, I used to visit other Gulf countries, other European countries. So I didn't feel that I was sort of a foreigner in Kuwait.
So you spent these years between Kuwait, the UK, and the US. These were the places that...
And the US, that's right. With frequent visits to European countries, and Gulf countries as well. And of course, I used to go to Egypt for vacation purposes and seeing the family, etc., etc.
Having lived in all these different places and spent the most time in Kuwait, how would you say that Kuwait is different from your other experiences?
When we went to Kuwait in 1966, it was totally different from when I left in 2014. A totally different country. It was very simple life. The people there were very hospitable. You could easily relate to them. Everything that was there was sort of not primitive, but simple. Let's call it simple. Life was very easy. The cost of living was very moderate, so we didn't feel that we were in a sort of a place where we had to spend all of our money. The savings weren't that much because, again, the salaries at that time weren't too many. It wasn't a high salary, but you could afford at least to have a car, you have your house, you have your household, etc., etc. So it wasn't bad. but eventually things turned in Kuwait to be a very modern country, like European countries, US itself, and completely different, actually, especially after the invasion. The invasion, I think, had its impact on Kuwait, and nearly everything in Kuwait has changed drastically. And they started, I think, the year that they spent in other countries, not necessarily Europe, but Europe, America, maybe Arab countries, other Arab countries, it has changed their vision of things. And when they came to Kuwait, again, the Kuwaitis, I'm talking about the Kuwaitis, they started modernizing Kuwait, and it's the Kuwait that anybody can see now. It's like the other Gulf countries with the skyscrapers, with the highways, sophisticated online system, etc., etc. So it has changed a lot.
You mentioned the invasion. Were you there during the invasion?
No, I wasn't. I was actually in the States, attending a course with the World Bank, and I was actually sent there by my place of work to take the fellowship with the World Bank in 1990, and that was it. I didn't go back to Kuwait until 1991. It was in July when I received a phone call from a colleague of ours who was the head of administration, a Kuwaiti fellow, and he told me that they want us back, and he even sent the to whom it may concern, or they call it Adam Mumana, no objection certificate for us to go back to Kuwait. And I started actually calling my colleagues and distributing these, and we all went back and we started the operation again. The place where we worked was actually in a mess because it was sort of looted, and everything was broken, and it took us quite some time in order to replace things, but eventually we were able to put it back on track, and we started offering again our programs, because where I worked then, it was the Institute of Banking Studies in affiliation with the Central Bank of Kuwait, and we started again delivering our programs to the bankers in Kuwait.
You mentioned your friend who worked with the Ministry of Education who introduced you to the job back in 1966. Were there any other people from your friends or your family that had already...
No, nobody was there. Nobody was there, actually. I didn't, I'm sorry to say, I didn't even hear about Kuwait at all, and I had no idea whatsoever. But at that time I was single, and the salaries again in Egypt were meager. So he told me, well, it's much better so that you could get married, you could have a flat or a wife, etc., etc. So that's why he pushed me actually and convinced me to go there. He stayed there for 3 years, and during these 3 years, I started to have more friends. And as I told you before, life was very, very easy, and the people were very nice, even the Kuwaitis. It was very easy to deal with the Kuwaitis then. I think nowadays it's a little bit different, because the old generation is totally different from the new generation, and even the sophistication that has taken place nowadays is totally different. When we reached Kuwait, we didn't need a visa at that time. You just got on the plane and you land there, and you're more than welcome in Kuwait. And it used to be like that for ages. And even your friends, if you were inviting a friend, he would come to Kuwait, he would arrive to Kuwait, You would entertain him. He would stay with you for a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and leaves without anybody asking who is he or anything about him. Just a stamp while he's entering the country, a stamp while he's leaving, and that's it. So that was actually very easy. So I think sophistication started after the invasion. And I think the reason is that they had a very bad experience, not only the Kuwaitis, by the way, because even I was myself, even though I wasn't there, but I was affected because my flat was broken into, my car and that of my wife had been stolen. So we were actually affected. But for the Kuwaitis, they were, I think, mentally and psychologically affected. And that's why they started to change their behavior towards not the Iraqis who invaded their country, but towards all foreigners. And they use the word foreigners, not expatriates. This is something which should be actually documented, because I think the term that should have been used is expatriate, not a foreigner. But we don't blame them, because amongst those you find so many nice people whom you deal with, who were so nice, so kind. I even remember when my tenure ended and I was about to leave, that all my Kuwaiti colleagues, friends, they gathered, they hosted a ceremony, a very large ceremony, to honor me, gifts, presents, very nice words given by my colleagues, the Kuwaitis. So I have a very, very nice relationship with some of them until today, even though I had left in 2014, I'm sorry, 2014. So that's why life is a little bit different. I think it's the youth who didn't experience the simple life before, who are now in power and who are controlling nearly everything. And that's why we always hear complaints from people living there that they are not being treated well, they are not treated as expats. No, they are treated as foreigners, etc., etc.
I was also going to say, the fact that you moved in 1966, this is considered early. Most people I know moved in the 70s or the 80s. What was the reaction of your family or people around you to you moving?
My family didn't agree at all. At that time, by the way, I was 22 years of age. So I was very, very young, and my mom was actually in a very devastated mood. My dad was the same, and they didn't actually approve at first. But I tried to convince them that I'm going to try something else, and I had the idea of traveling afterwards to one of the European countries to get a higher degree. This was my dream, because if I had stayed in Egypt, I would have got a degree from Elshimy University, Cairo University, etc., which is like millions of others. Whereas if you say, I have got a degree from England or from the USA, I think you are amongst hundreds, not millions of people. So this may be the reason. The second reason why I stayed there is that I got married immediately. I didn't wait. It was just 1 year, and then I got married. And this may have encouraged me to stay there for a long time.
Did you meet your wife in Kuwait or in Egypt?
No. In Egypt, she is part of the family. Far relative.
And your children, did they spend their entire childhood in Kuwait?
Yes, they stayed until they reached the IGCSE O level, and they left Kuwait because they couldn't join the university again. This was one of the things which is bad, because they were not given the chance, even though their scores weren't too bad at all, and they had to leave. They spent their education here in Egypt, and that was it. That was it.
When you first arrived in Kuwait, what were your first impressions or your first memories from this time?
The people were hospitable to start with, but I was scared at that time. Arriving in a country with only one friend or one far relative, is not actually very close relative, and the age again margin was great between me and him. He was married with 3 children, and of course, if you are a bachelor there, you have to abide by certain rules, that you can't go anytime. You have to, of course, there were no telephones at that time, no mobile phones. So you have to find a way in order to contact him and tell him, well, I'd like to visit, etc., etc. So it wasn't actually, the first year was horrible for me. It wasn't good. And I did my best to excel in my work, and I think that my superiors, they were very happy with my work, with the quality of work that I did. But when I used to go home, I used to go home sad, because I was on my own, and again, mixing with others from different nationalities wasn't an easy thing to do. So that's why I decided either to stay in Egypt the second year, or to marry and bring my wife, or take my wife to Kuwait. And that's why I got married early, and I think at 22, yes, 23, because I went to Kuwait when I was 22. I stayed for a year. I got married 23.
And in that time, how did you keep in touch with Egypt or your family back home?
As I have told you, the phone call system wasn't there. If I wanted to call them, I had to go to a place called Safa, where the main telecommunications office is. And then I had to file an application or take a number or something like this, stay for 3 or 4 hours until the call is connected. Later on, when I was able to have a phone at home, I used to spend, I think, to stay for about 2 days or 3 days asking for the call. I used to sort of file a petition. I want to call Egypt, and they used to take the number, etc., etc., and then they tell you within a day, 2 days, 3 days, and it could be any time, 3:00 a.m. They could ask you, your call is okay now. You get ready for your call, and then they connect us. So that was how we got in touch. The other way was to write letters, which took ages to reach, either because of the postal system in Kuwait or the postal system in Egypt. I'm not blaming Kuwait or blaming Egypt, but there were delays in delivering the regular letters.
You mentioned that you interacted a lot with people from different nationalities.
Yes.
What were, or who constituted your friends mainly, and what was your relationship with other Egyptians throughout the time you were there?
I had some very good contacts with a number of Egyptians, and they were from different posts. Some were physicians, some were engineers, some were teachers. So it wasn't only confined to teachers. Regarding the other nationalities, some of them were Palestinians, Syrians. I think on my first year, I had about 4 or 5 colleagues who were from Britain, because at that time, on my first year, the Ministry of Education started sort of trying to recruit teachers from the UK. So they recruited about 4 or 5 teachers, and they were with us at the school where I used to work. And I got on well with them. We were even friends. Mostly I had a UN society.
And I'm also curious, you've kind of talked about this already, but what were some of the challenges for you or even for your wife who had never been in adapting to the new country?
Yeah. It was difficult. It was difficult. I can't say that it was a piece of cake, neither for myself nor for my wife. My wife was still very young. She was 18 years of age. She has just finished school, and with no friends, no family, except the family of my far relative. We started having some friends, and we started exchanging visits. This was the only thing that we used to do. We used to go to the cinema. At that time, the cinema was very popular. There was a cinema called, I think, El Andalus. This was the best place that we could go to. And the seafront, there were a number of restaurants there where we used to go during the weekend to have a meal or so. So this was the life. Actually, her mother visited us. Her father, who happened to be working with the Arab League, came on a conference once, and he visited us. So her brother again came from Germany. He had another conference, and they work actually in the diplomatic sector, and that's why they visit Kuwait and other countries as well. So they sort of gave us some what you could call support while we were there. So it was difficult, but again, with their support, it was okay. The first year, my wife had to go during my actually vacation to go to Egypt. She stayed there for about a month because she didn't work at that time. And then she came back. So we tried to sort of bridge the gap between Kuwait and Egypt by this visit.
What would you say over the course of your time there you've kind of spoken about this already, but were the most significant changes?
I think it's dealing with the people. This is the most important thing, and the second is the sophistication in the infrastructure of Kuwait, and also not the popularity, what you could call having so many places to visit, access to so many things to do. You feel in Kuwait that you are in England or in the USA. It's totally European country, apart from the fact that the inhabitants are wearing the dijdash and oqal, etc., etc. But most of them, again, they started, I think, after the invasion, immediately they started sending their children to English schools, English medium schools. A lot of them, I know, a lot of them, in the past, they used to send them only to Arab schools, whereas after the invasion, I think maybe because during the invasion they were in English medium schools, so they wanted to continue. So I think the situation is or has changed a lot. we can't compare life in the 60s with life in the 20s or even 1900s. No way to compare, because life was very easy. Maybe it's a little bit dull, but nowadays, or when I was there 6 or 7 years ago, it was rather modern, rather more cultured, more civilized, more places to visit. The streets were highways now, not as we used to have in the past. The buildings in themselves. So I think there is a lot of changes. Apart from the fact that I used to teach at Kuwait University for some time, and again I find that the younger generation there is trying to achieve sort of places, reputable ranks in anywhere. So they want to finish their studies with a good grade, a very good grade. Some of them now, they travel to other European countries or the States or Canada to get an MA or a PhD. A lot of them join the Faculty of Medicine, the Faculty of Engineering, which requires high standard of again, sophistication. So I think they are doing good now. They are doing good.
How would you say that migration throughout the years changed your relationship with Egypt, if it did?
I am very fond of Egypt, despite the fact that I have a U.S. nationality. I'm an American citizen, but still, I adore Egypt. I love Egypt. It's not a slogan, but it's a fact. And that's why every time I used to have sort of a small vacation, I used to travel to Egypt even for 3 or 4 days. Maybe because of the family ties, maybe. But again, I have this sort of sense of belonging to Egypt. Whatever you do in a country that you have immigrated to, again, they don't treat you as one of the citizens. With all respect, in the States, I stayed for 6 years and I was given that nationality. In Kuwait, I stayed for more than 20 years, 30 years, and they didn't even give me a permanent residence. Of course, I do respect this. I do respect this because they may have their own reservations towards awarding the nationality to non-Kuwaitis. But I think they should have sort of reviewed the history of those. I didn't apply, by the way, to have a nationality, but they should check the history, the background of those who want to be permanent residents, even not to take the nationality, to be a permanent resident of Kuwait, because they could afford the service which maybe a Kuwaiti can't do. And based on this, they could either say, yes, this person is suitable to stay here, or he is unsuitable, and we are going to deny him the right to stay or to take a permanent resident. So this, I think, something which is in the Gulf area in general, that they are not granting the nationality or the permanent residency for anybody. Whereas in the UK, for instance, my brother went there. He was on a work permit, and he used to pay the taxes. 5 years exactly, they sent him a letter telling him, please visit our immigration department. I think they call it the Home Office. He went there. They gave him the passport without him asking for it. So that's the difference between these countries, because he was paying the taxes. He entered the country legally, and he didn't commit any felony or crime or anything. So they granted him the nationality, and his children were born there, again granted the nationality. So that's the only thing which I think a lot of expats would expect in Kuwait or in any other Gulf country, that they need to be treated regarding the permanent residency. Again, I'm not talking about the nationality thing, but I'm talking about the residency itself, permanent resident, because he had served the country for 30 years, for instance, and they could give him some more benefits. So this is one of the determinants that we as experts used to talk about. But again, and this is not for political reasons, the Kuwaitis are highly intelligent. The Kuwaitis that I dealt with, at least, highly intelligent, highly professional, and when they decide to achieve something, they do it in a clever way and in a nice way. Until today, I have some very good contacts with them. We exchange emails, we exchange WhatsApp sort of messages. If they visit here, before the corona, we used to meet. I visited Kuwait on 2 occasions, and I visited them. So I think the people there are nice.
Did you ever consider permanently settling in the US, or if it had been an option, Kuwait, or was the plan to always come back to Egypt?
I actually was going to stay in the US permanently. And of course, I had to stay for some time until I'm qualified to take the nationality. Afterwards, I thought that my family, who didn't want to go to the States, I need to be with them. And that's why I decided to go back to Egypt. But every year we go to the States, and we have our own business, my ID, my driving license, my passport, everything. We go there to either renew something or to pay something or taxes, etc., etc. So we never severed the relationship with the US.
What would you say is your fondest memory from the time you spent in Kuwait?
Knowing very nice people. Of course, my income for sure has been better than if I was here at the beginning. But when I reached here, I found that people are more wealthier than people in Kuwait. So this is. But at the beginning, no. At the beginning, it was better than Egypt. But nowadays, people are even better than those who have lived in the Gulf countries. God bless all. But well, let me again rephrase it. That what I like there is the people. The recent years in Kuwait, or after the invasion, it was very good, and again the treatment of the people wasn't bad at all. Although, of course, I have talked about a little issue or a number of issues which are the nitty-gritty things which affect the morale of the expats in Kuwait.